they've seen the surge play out on the streets in real time. And for some parents, it's prompted some challenging conversations with their kids. How do they explain what's been happening here? How do they manage the fear or anxiety their children may feel about what they're seeing on TV or happening to their own family and neighbors? So tonight, we'll talk with two experts about how to parent through uncertain times. And we want you to join our conversation. What questions do you have about talking to your kids about the immigration crackdown here? And if you're a young adult, we want to hear from you too. How has this moment affected you? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Rylan Barton. The White House says representatives of over 40 nations will take part in a meeting tomorrow of what President Trump calls his Board of Peace. They're trying to raise money and troops for Gaza, as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
At a Security Council meeting on the Middle East, U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz was again calling on countries to support the Board of Peace. He says it will announce over $5 billion, and he dismisses criticism about the makeup of the board from, as he puts it, the chattering classes.
The Board of Peace, colleagues, is a board of action, and we will build upon this progress already made by addressing Gaza's early recovery and its humanitarian needs.
27 nations have formally joined. Only one country, Indonesia, has so far committed to sending troops to a stabilization force. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
Congressional Democrats traveled to Ohio today to depose billionaire Les Wexner about his connections to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Wexner denies wrongdoing, but the legislators say they aren't convinced that's true. George Shilcock with member station WSU reports.
Wexner says in a statement he was naive and foolish to trust Epstein with his vast fortune. Wexner founded The Limited and later owned Victoria's Secret, through which Epstein allegedly used his access to sexually traffic young women. House Oversight Ranking Member Robert Garcia of California says the 88-year-old is downplaying how close he was to Epstein, who Garcia says was enabled by Wexner's wealth.
I do not believe when Mr. Wexner says that he did not have a personal relationship or a friendly relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I think that is bogus.
Garcia says no Republicans on the committee showed up, only their staff. For NPR News, I'm George Shilcock in Columbus.
At the Winter Olympics, double drama in men's ice hockey as two favorites, the U.S. and Canada, were both forced into overtime in knockout quarterfinal games. Steve Futterman reports.
The dream gold medal match of the U.S. versus Canada was on the brink twice on Wednesday. In the end, both the Americans and Canadians survived, but each had to do it in overtime. In the U.S.-Sweden game, the Americans were 91 seconds away from victory when Sweden tied the game 1-1. In the overtime, Quinn Hughes, who plays for the Minnesota Wild, was able to get the winning goal to keep the Americans alive. The Canada-Czechia game was even more dramatic. The Czechs took a 3-2 lead with less than 8 minutes left in regulation. Canada, minutes away from elimination, was able to tie the game and then, like the U.S., win in overtime. The two teams now advance to Friday's semifinals. For NPR News, I'm Steve Futterman in Milan.
The U.S. stock market ticked higher today. The S&P 500 rose more than 0.5%. The Dow added 0.25%. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting books, radio, podcasts, film, television, theater, and more to bridge science and the humanities. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
For NPR News in the Twin Cities, I'm Elena C. Yesterday's opening of the Minnesota legislative session marked the first day for 4 new state lawmakers. It was the beginning of the legislative careers of Republican Michael Holmstrom Jr. in the Senate and DFLers XP Lee, Meg Lugar-Nicolai, and Shelley Buck in the House. Buck, who represents parts of Maplewood and Woodbury, says it was both exciting and overwhelming to start.
There's a lot of little nuances and procedures and policies that I didn't even think about. So it's going to be a learning curve for me, but I love challenges. I love to learn. So just finding the right people to connect with and learn from them.
The first-year members are jumping right into work with dozens of committee hearings scheduled for this week. Javier Abreu Vasquez is finally set to return home to Minnesota. He's the kidney transplant recipient who was detained by ICE for nearly 2 weeks without all of his kidney anti-rejection medications. Abreu Vasquez's wife and attorneys say authorities at the detention facility in Texas have the medications, but have not been giving him the correct dosages. His doctors at Mayo Clinic tried to intervene, but attorney David Wilson says federal authorities did not respond. Wilson says he understands detention facilities are not hospitals.
But there is moral obligation, probably even legal obligation, to ensure that they're maintaining or stabilizing someone so they don't become worse. They don't have to get better. They surely shouldn't get worse while they're in jail.
A judge ordered Abreu Vasquez's release on bond, and that release could happen soon. Wilson says the timing of the release is still unclear. U2 released a politically charged 6-track EP, Days of Ash, today ahead of a full album later this year. One of the tracks, American Obituary, is inspired by the fatal ICE shooting of Minneapolis resident Renee Macklin Good. Good's death in January has sparked widespread protests and intensified debate over federal immigration enforcement. And snow continues to pile up on the North Shore, with some communities reporting more than 2 feet and counting. From yesterday's and today's blizzard, snow also continues to fall in southern Minnesota at this hour. This is NPR News.
Support comes from Ballard Spahr, a national law firm providing strategic legal services to guide businesses in Minnesota and throughout the country. Learn more about Ballard at Ballard Spahr, SPAHR.com. Ballard goes beyond.
Good evening. I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. If your household is anything like mine, it has been hard not to absorb the near constant stream of news and videos and visuals of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown here. We've seen arrests, protests, and deaths in a very short amount of time. And for some people, it's been happening right outside their front door. For me, it's prompted some tricky conversations with my own kids. They're baffled by what they're seeing and hearing, and at times it's really worried them too. So tonight, we're talking with 2 experts about how kids process scary and stressful events like those we've been seeing here in Minnesota, and especially for kids whose families, friends, and neighbors have been directly affected by the administration's immigration policies. Here to answer your questions about how to talk to your kids about the ICE surge, how to help them manage their fears and anxieties, and how to take care of yourself too, are Dr. PJ Stryker. She is a pediatric psychiatrist for the inpatient mental health unit at Children's Minnesota, and she's also an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Minnesota. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Stryker.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
And we also have Erin Walsh. She is the co-founder of the Spark and Stitch Institute. That's a Minneapolis-based organization that focuses on helping families, schools, and communities navigate the connection between child development, technology, and relationships. And she's also the author of It's Their World, Teens, Screens, and the Science of Adolescence. Thank you for being here, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me.
We want you to join our conversation. How have you explained the surge in federal immigration agents to your kids? What information are you sharing and why? And if you're a young adult, we want you to call in too. How has this moment affected you? You can give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. So I want to start by asking both of you how you've been seeing this show up in your professional settings. Dr. Stryker, I will start with you. You work with kids all the time. Have you seen the effects of this surge show up in the conversations that you're having with your patients?
You know, we've seen a lot of kids on our inpatient unit, and I think it's a topic of conversation frequently, whether kids have been personally affected or seen things. They are seeing things on the news. They're talking about it at school. And it's been a conversation on our unit, in our therapy groups, in our art therapy groups, in our music therapy groups. Kids are asking questions. They're wondering what's happening. They're talking about their own fears and anxieties for themselves, for their family, and for their peers. And, you know, it's really been amazing to see the ideas they have, the questions they have, the maturity they've had around some of these conversations. And, it's just been lovely to work with them and talk to them about it. And at the same time, it's so sad and scary that kids are bringing this up and having to talk about it when they're dealing with their own mental health issues already.
Yeah, it's a pretty tumultuous and I would just say uncertain time in general to be to be a kid and to be raising kids too. Yeah. And Erin, what about you? I mean, you do a lot of work with schools and teenagers in particular. That's your area. Like, how are you seeing this show up?
Yeah, I think I'd probably sum it up with 2 words like big feelings. And of course, the range of those feelings really depends upon people's proximity to danger and to threat, and also their experiences in terms of what school feels like and their neighborhoods feel like. But, no matter where I am across the state, they're overwhelmed, they're anxious, they're angry, they're scared. And I think that range of feelings really reflects this time of massive disruption, whether you are scared for the safety of your own family or for your neighbors. And I know I have the opportunity and the honor to work with a lot of educators who are doing this incredible thing, especially in the metro right now, of teaching students sitting in their classrooms as well as reaching through the screen and making sure that they're providing students with opportunities to learn if they don't feel safe leaving their home. So there are a lot of feelings and a lot of exhaustion as this wears on.
Yeah, and we sort of have framed this around parenting, but Erin, you make a good point, which is that there are adults interacting with kids around this in all different ways right now. So we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Dr. Stryker, going back to how this is showing up in kids, kids sometimes don't do a great job of articulating their feelings, or maybe their emotions are sort of coming out sideways. What should maybe parents or teachers or other adults who have kids in their lives be on the lookout for right now if a kid maybe is experiencing anxiety around what's been happening around the ICE surge, but maybe isn't doing the best job of saying so?
Well, I think that's exactly right. We all wish kids could tell us exactly what they were thinking and feeling at all times. It's pretty rare that happens. So I tell, parents and, teachers or anybody that's talking to a kid, what are the physical symptoms that they're expressing, right? So sometimes it will come out, especially in younger kids, as more frequent stomach aches, more frequent headaches, just kind of this general, like, I don't feel good. I want to stay home. I want to be close to you, mom or dad. And kind of the sense of just like general, like, something's not right, right? And I want to stay home. They can sometimes be more avoidance. And so, if kids are saying, well, I'll do this, but can we do it together? I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to grandma and grandpa's house. I don't, want to go on this play date. I really want to be home. Sometimes that can just be a sign that kids are really looking for their safe space, right? And you as their safe person at home. If kids are having more problems falling asleep, more problems at bedtime that would be out of their unusual. I just want to stay up later. Can you read me another story? More tears at bedtime, more anger at bedtime. Those can really be big signs. And the other thing, if you're really noticing your child not eating as well, right? Or maybe even binge eating more, like wanting more carbs and treats and snacks, or just not having their normal appetite. Those are really big signs that something is happening that you might want to question more.
Yeah. We have Joe in Minneapolis on the line. Joe, what do you want to share with us?
Well, as I explained to the person earlier, I'm using this as a teaching moment for my 3 young boys. And part of the teaching moment, it's multifaceted. One of them is that when you do indeed break the law, there's consequences. But also within that sometimes that the government doesn't act appropriately as they should. And this is what I think they're doing right now, that they're taking much too heavy-handed of an approach. They do indeed need to enforce the laws that we have, and I've tried to impress that upon my kids, but I've also tried to impress that upon them that I don't want to say you can't trust the government, but you sometimes have to question the government, and that's why the protesters are out there, and this is why America works. We can indeed protest our government and should when they're doing the wrong things, but also to recognize we have laws in this country, and if you break the laws, there are consequences. And I do think that these are 2 very important things to teach the kids.
And Joe, if I can keep you on for a second, how have your kids reacted to that explanation, and what other questions have they had about all of this?
Well, they've asked very specifically, how do you know about what the laws are? And I said, partly, you know in your own heart when you're doing wrong, because I think that's something you tell young kids. And when you harm other people or you're doing things against what you should, you need to ask why. And in this particular case, I don't think that they would understand what legal citizenship is, other than my oldest one does. So I try to tell them that you want to be as aware of these things as you can, but that you need to be aware in certain instances so that you don't break the laws and have to suffer the consequences.
Yeah. Joe, thanks so much. Aaron, unpack that for us a little bit. What I hear is a parent who's taking a pretty comprehensive approach, I guess, to trying to help their kids reason what's going on. What are you hearing there that resonates with you?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing for starters is that this is a parent who wants to help their kids organize the experience, and different families are going to do that in different ways. But what I hear is this reminder that kids are making sense of this, even if we don't talk to them, and often making up stories or taking little shards of information, absorbing the emotions or the stress from people around them, and they're trying to organize it themselves. So I think stepping into that role of talking to our kids, asking them questions, getting curious about what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're feeling. I think before we even get to what should we say, I think one of the places we want to start is what are the kinds of questions we can ask, and starting with that fundamental place of getting really curious, whether it's with our 5-year-olds or our 15-year-olds, of what are you hearing? How are you making sense of it? What are other kids saying about what's happening? I do think it's an opportunity to share some of our family values, with the core goal, of course, as we think about trying to humanize as many people as everyone, and centering people's sort of humanity and how we care for each other. So I think, Dr. Stryker and I can get into some of those talking points, but what I hear first and foremost is stepping into the driver's seat of that conversation and not saying, well, they're too young, they're not going to understand, or they're probably not hearing anything. They are hearing things, they are observing things, and it's the job of adults around them to help them organize those experiences.
Yeah. Right. And the piece that I
and
really
liked...
liked...
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the piece I really liked is Joel's kind of thinking through, right? Like my oldest kid may understand something very differently than my youngest kid, right? And how do I have that nuanced conversation at all levels? Because nothing that's happening is completely black and white. And so how do I, take both perspectives, but also adjust that for the age of my child and help them understand?
And Dr. Stryker, actually, that's kind of what I wanted to get at with you is, what do we know about how children of different ages actually absorb trauma or experience scary things happening in the world? Can you say more about age appropriateness, I guess, when it comes to talking about this stuff?
Absolutely. So, when I think about, a preschool, kindergarten, first grade child, a lot of what I think that they absorb is the visual piece, right? They don't necessarily have the words or understand the verbal piece of it as much. And so, when they are expressing kind of this feeling of trauma, it may come out more in action, it may come out more in artwork, it may come out more just in behavior. Versus a teenager is going to have a much better verbal sense and be able to probably express it more verbally. They may also have some behavior and kind of physical symptoms that come out. But they can, you can be more of a verbal conversation with much more like an adult language almost. And so we're going to tailor our approach to them differently, right? So with a 5-year-old, I'm going to really talk more about kind of how is your body feeling, right? What kinds of things are you seeing? Are there things that you've seen that are scary? Are there questions that you have? And then we're going to reassure them in a more appropriate way for a 5-year-old, right? That might be physical touch, that might be hugs, that might be, spending that time together. Whereas with, a 15-year-old, I'm going to have a pretty honest conversation probably about what's going on, what do they understand, and then really direct them into how can we work on this together, right? What are things you feel like you want to do as you're learning about citizenship in school and you're learning about free speech and protesting and all of these things, and trying to really direct them in a positive way of expressing their feelings and fears.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking with two experts about how you can talk to your kids about the ice surge in Minnesota. How have you been explaining all of this to your children? What information are you sharing and why? What questions do they have? And I'm also interested in hearing from young adults tonight. We want to know how this moment has affected you. You can give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. So, Erin, I want to give you like a real world example from my house around this.
Let's get into
because
it.
I got stuck. Yeah, like I got a little stuck. So my oldest is 13, and they hadn't, and obviously the news is on like all the time in my house. My kids know, every radio personality at NPR at this point. But, I wasn't getting many questions about it until, I was having to leave unexpectedly on weekends to do some reporting on this and help in our coverage. But the thing that really got my 13-year-old was the story about Liam Ramos. He is the child who, has become such an emblem of all of this. He's the little boy in the blue hat. He was a kindergartner. He was deported with his father, now back in Minnesota, from what we understand. And he just couldn't wrap his head around the idea that families were being separated or, that he'd been taken with his dad away from his mom. And the thing that, I feel like I'm so good at sometimes with my kids is just being really honest and matter of fact. And I really struggled to be honest. And so what's your advice for parents who might have been struggling like me in that moment with how much information should I actually be giving my very curious, maturing 13-year-old who has questions about the world? Is honesty a double-edged sword in these situations?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to note that you're not alone in that struggle, that very few parents right now are like, oh yeah, I feel like I know exactly what to say. I'm nailing it. Yeah. I think that, I'm shocked. I was born for this job.
Please call in and tell us what to do.
Yeah, if that's you, please let us know. So I just want to affirm that feeling of I don't know quite what to say myself is also really, really normal. And to give ourselves a ton of self-compassion, that it's hard for us to organize some of our own feelings around this experience. So just for all the listeners out there, that there isn't some 5-step solution that Dr. Stryker and I are going to share, that we're all going to feel confident and calm and feel like we know exactly what to say at every moment. I think sometimes, especially with older kids, we can acknowledge, I'm struggling a little bit with exactly what to say. Why don't we start with, again, what do you know? What are you hearing? What questions do you have? And when we get overwhelmed, one of the things we can try to remind ourselves is that we don't have to do it all at once. So we can slow ourselves down a bit. Smaller bites are easier for all ages of children. When we get overwhelmed, sometimes we overtalk. We go into a long lecture about the history of immigration. And and all of a sudden, an hour later, the teenager's already wandered off. And they're like, I just kind of wanted to know, where is he right now? So again, just that slowing ourselves down, asking questions, and then just sharing as much factual information in small bites, and then pausing, right? How do you make sense of that? What else do you need to know? Making room for some of the feelings that are going to come up, so we're not just focusing on just the information. It is really hard that, if they saw the picture of little Liam, right. That feeling makes sense. This is really hard. This is a little kid who shouldn't have experienced this. And it's okay to just pause with, it makes sense that you feel this way and this is sad. We don't have to fix that feeling. We don't have to make it go away. We don't have to solve it with a bunch of our words. So going slow, bite-sized. Dr. Stryker, I don't know if you have additional advice, but I just want to affirm that we don't need to have a 20-point talking format lecture series lined up for these moments.
I think it's a really good opportunity to also model it's okay to have emotions and not have the right words, right? Yeah. So I think, obviously if your child asks you something, you may not be prepared in that moment. But I would suggest if you're going to start the conversation, maybe take a few minutes beforehand to ground yourself, right? And kind of get yourself settled and what kind of your plan is to talk about it with your child before you just launch into it, right? Because I think we all have feelings too. It's very hard for us to see them as well. Even, these are things that adults and kids should not be seeing. And so it is okay for us to kind of have feelings, but to take a step back and what skills are we going to use in the moment to calm down? And acknowledge with our child that we have feelings too, right? We are humans. we are parents and we are going to have feelings and we can have feelings together. And here's the skills I'm going to use, like, wow, this is making me feel really like sad to talk about. So I'm going to take some deep breaths and like take a drink of water. Do you want to do that too? Does that help you when you're feeling stressed? And so we're modeling it's okay to have feelings, and we're modeling how we're going to use our skills to manage our feelings.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking with two experts about how to talk to your kids about the ice surge in Minnesota. We want to know how the kids in your life are doing right now, and what questions do you have about supporting their mental health in this moment? And if you're a young adult, we want to hear from you too. How has this moment affected you? You can call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Dr. Stryker, going back to what you were just saying, I'm also wondering if there's value in explaining both this situation and other like big things happening in the world that could seem scary to kids maybe who don't have questions. Like, should we wait to be asked before we explain, or is there value in just taking it head on?
I think there's a lot of value in taking it head on, because at the end of the day, kids are hearing and seeing much more than we think they are. I know my child will sometimes, I'll be like looking at something on Instagram and he'll like come up and start like look over my shoulder, right? And I may not have even realized he's doing that, but once I do, I'm like, oh, I got to put this down. Like, I don't want him seeing these things, right? And so I think it's really important that we are starting these conversations. Again, I think that's modeling for kids, like, it is okay to start a hard conversation, right? It is okay to ask questions. And so we should also reach out and say, hey, what's going on? What kind of things have you heard about? Where are you at with, are you having a good day, a bad day? Have you heard about some of these things that are happening? And I bet most of them have questions, right? And even if it, like my child was like, we aren't going outside for recess. I don't really understand what's happening. And that was kind of his only understanding of what was going on. And so we talked through that.
At your son's school, they weren't going outside for recess for a period of time.
Yep.
Oh,
and
wow.
so,
okay.
We talked about like, well, this is kind of what's happening, right? Like there are people that are scared. Bad things have kind of been happening. We want to make sure all the kids in the community are safe. We want to make sure your teachers are safe. And so right now we're staying inside. Like, that must feel really bad to not like get that energy out of your body in the middle of the day. How can we make it feel better in the classroom when you're inside for recess? And how can we make sure you're getting that energy out after school, right, in a safe way?
Yeah.
So, I think even if they don't quite understand what's happening, changes have happened. Stress is happening. And so if we don't help them acknowledge those things, I think we're missing out.
And Erin, you have written about kids and screens, right? We think about older kids and how they're getting information just, in general. It's a little terrifying. But I mean, with teenagers in particular who might have actually seen some of these videos of these fatal shootings before they even had a chance to talk to their parent about them, should parents be kind of like on, extra lookout at this point for how their kids are interacting with social media when so much of this story has been told through social media?
Yeah, absolutely. What we know now is that the violence isn't just in the streets. It spreads quickly across the internet, and young people are sometimes exposed to it over and over and over again. That is not a benign impact. That can cause real symptoms of anxiety, overwhelm, depressive symptoms over time. We know that there are real mental health consequences to the sort of steady stream of online violence, especially if they don't have adults who are helping them organize those experiences, who are talking to them about it, or who don't feel like young people who don't feel like they can sort of step into the driver's seat of their digital life to help have some agency around when they see things, how much choice they have, taking digital breaks. So I think this is a time not just to talk about what's happening in the streets, but what's happening on our phones and on our tablets, and the kinds of images that they might see even if they had no interest in seeing that video. My older teenager definitely knew about both shootings before I even talked to him, because he had already heard about it from friends on his device. So I think what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're talking about that. We are thinking for younger children, especially doing our very best to shield them from seeing the evening news, from seeing the kinds of things. Very young children do not need to be sort of constantly exposed to this steady drumbeat of violence on our screens. And for kids as they get older and those devices sit in their pockets and they have access to it all day, this is a time for curious, non-judgmental conversations. What are you seeing? How is it making you feel? Do you have a sense of what you might do to protect yourself? Do you have a sense of what you might do or what kind of information you might seek out that might make you feel better? What does a digital break look like? Not as I'm going to confiscate your phone and make it a very punitive thing, but again, that sense of digital agency. What would it feel like to take a break from our phones tonight and do something together as a family? And I want to acknowledge that for some young people who've been in their homes, their phones have also been an opportunity to connect, to stay connected with learning and with friends. So that nuanced sort of what kids are doing online, why they're doing it, and who they're connecting with really matters. But I think absolutely this is a time to not just write it off and say, oh, it's just a video. These videos have real impact on how we see ourselves, each other, and the world.
Yeah. And one thing I've been thinking about in preparation for our conversation tonight was like the feeling of control, right? Like I think people have felt out of control around what's happening outside their front door or in our state. And Erin, I'm wondering if there is something positive around, maybe helping your kids feel a sense of control by getting them involved in some of the outreach that people have been doing, like mutual aid, taking your kid to a protest. Is there value in having your kids do those things if it helps them both better understand the situation and also gives them a sense of control?
Yes, absolutely. Purposeful action is a wonderful antidote to despair. And I think that what we want to keep in mind is age appropriateness of those invitations for purposeful action. So as we're saying, oh, it's really hard or we feel really sad, let's look and see, Mr. Rogers always talked about looking for the helpers. What are the helpers doing in our community and how might we help? So for a young child, that might be drawing a picture for a friend who's not coming to school, or maybe making a little treat for them or something like that. And for older kids, they're really starting, their brains are built to be asking questions like, how can I contribute, and who cares about what I have to say, and how do I fit into the world? And so purposeful action for adolescents is actually very protective for their mental health. What that doesn't look like, though, is saying this is what you need to do. This is how you should feel, and this is what you need to do. I think this is a time to be giving warm invitations for purposeful action. What I mean by that is there might be one adolescent who's like, I want to be on the front lines. I want to go to every march. I want to participate in a walkout. And another adolescent for whom that feels totally overwhelming. What they want to do is they might want to, write a letter to their legislator. They might want to help with local mutual aid efforts, packing up food boxes for families. They might want to do some media arts and go around and take pictures of what's happening, signs in their neighborhood, right? I'm giving examples of a range of opportunities because these are the kinds of warm invitations we might want to model for young people and invite them into that in ways where the end result is I had a feeling, that feeling was overwhelming, and I felt a sense of agency that I could do something about it in a way that kept me connected and made me feel like I had some agency in terms of making the world a little bit better than it was before I took action. That happens over a developmental time scale. So for those of you listening that are like, I tried to invite my teen and they're like, I'd rather play video games. That's okay, right? We're just going to hang out tonight.
Normal.
That's also very normal. We don't have to despair and be like, they don't care about anything. They're apathetic. It's totally normal to be like, that overwhelms me. And right now I'm going to have a little happy distraction for a bit. And we leave that and we give another warm invitation the next day for maybe a different way to get involved. There's such a wide constellation of efforts happening. That's one of the amazing things that's happening in Minnesota right now. There are so many ways to care and so many ways to help our neighbors.
Yeah. And Dr. Stryker, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of taking those small steps every day, right? And so, as Erin said, there's kids who are planning walkouts, and it's beautiful to see, right? And it's also okay to have a day where you just have to shut down. And what you can do is play video games or call your friend. And I think we just have to appreciate that every kid is at a different place and every kid is like in a different space to manage how they're feeling that day. My favorite thing is really just to remind people, like, how do we, create structure and routine in the sense of chaos, right? And so we are going to continue doing the things we can do, right? If we're going to school, we're going to still get up, we're going to go to school, we're going to go to work, we're going to come home, and we're going to do things as a family, right? If we aren't going to school, we're going to still kind of get up, we're going to eat our meals, we're going to do activities, we're going to do the things that make us feel good. It's, I sort of think about when you go on vacation, and by day 7, you're kind of like, I'm out of my routine. Like, this doesn't feel good, right? And as much as we can bring a sense of like as much normalcy as we can, I think that gives everybody a better sense of this is our life, and then we're going to help people feel better. And we could add in fun things, right? We can talk about, let's all put our screens down. Let's maybe not all be on social media, and let's play a game together, right? Let's do a puzzle together. Let's eat a meal together. Let's do things to reconnect as people, and invite, all the kids in to do that. And I think that's really powerful because we've forgotten some of that in this life of chaos, and all of us wanting to know what's going on also, right? I think as adults, we also get addicted to the doom scroll and want to know what's going on and make sure we're not missing anything. And so again, the more we can model for ourselves and our kids, that human connection piece is so important.
Yeah, and I just want to just build on that for just a brief second and I think Dr. Stryker has said this before, and it's just a reminder that we focus so much on what to say. But when we look at children's resilience, a lot of it is also what we do. And that doing might be playing, it might be dancing, it might be our cultural traditions, spiritual traditions, whatever those sort of family rituals are, the hilarious show that you watch on a Friday night, the FaceTime with a family member in another country, whatever those things are that you typically do. This is what Dr. Ann Maston called ordinary magic, right? That sometimes extraordinary times actually are, resilience is rooted in kind of keeping to these ordinary things, which sometimes to me as a parent is very comforting that we are doing extraordinary things right now in Minnesota, but it's very useful for children to also root in the sort of relationships and the rhythms that help us orient to the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking with 2 experts about how to talk to your kids about the ice surge in Minnesota. We want to know how the kids in your life are doing right now and what questions you have about supporting their mental health as this all plays out. And also, if you're a young adult, we want to know how this moment has affected you as well. Give us a call at 651-227-6000, 800-242-2828. Dr. Stryker, we've been talking a lot about kids and families who are watching this play out on the news. Maybe they live in one of the neighborhoods that's been hardest hit by the immigration crackdown. But we have to talk about the families that are living in isolation right now because they are afraid to leave their home. When you look at that situation, both for the children and for the adults who are sort of living in fear, but also trying to, probably manage, like you just said, like doing these ordinary fun things at a time of fear. What are you thinking about in terms of what these families and children will need going forward, what that impact might be for them?
So there's a few things I get concerned about. I think we saw during COVID, right? It's really hard to get an education, doing schooling virtually. And when you look at people of color and who are more likely to be staying at home and isolating because of the events that are happening, I'm already worried about achievement gaps, right? And so I think when we look in the long term, how do kids catch up? How do kids get an education? I think we are going to struggle with that for a long time, right? And how do we boost up educational ability and achievement? And the other piece I worry about is how are people getting health care? I think it's so hard to get care already, right? Like it's hard to get an appointment, it's hard to get in. How are we making sure that kids are getting care when they need it, especially for kids with chronic medical issues? I think, as much as we can do to support them, and I know there's groups that are, trying to make sure medications get delivered, or how do we do virtual care? But I worry that things will get so out of control, and as they come out of isolation, the needs are going to be much higher.
And, I think, too, about children who really have been directly affected. They've had a parent detained and taken away. We talked about Leon Ramos earlier, but there have been other children who have ended up at the Whipple building who have been taken out of the state. I mean, that's like another level here. How are those? What are you most worried about with kids who've really experienced this personally and directly?
Right. I think first up, we want to make sure they are doing their kind of basic activities of daily living, as we call them, right? So how are they eating? How are they taking care of themselves? Are they able to shower and kind of do the normal things we need to do as humans to feel good in a day, right? I worry about long-term effects of trauma, right? And how are kids going to sleep over time? When we look at a lot of these incidents, right? And we've had a lot in Minneapolis, right? We had the Indian Station school shooting, and now this ice surge, and the events that are happening. And I worry about kids and adults being afraid to do normal things, right? And what is the long-term impact on that going to be? We want kids to go to school. We want kids to go to the doctor. We want kids to go to their normal bakery on a Sunday morning and be able to get, their donut and hot chocolate that they get with their parents. And so how do we, help manage trauma that's happening in real time, but also those long-term effects of trauma, and not allowing kind of this pattern of avoidance to develop because of the trauma that's happened. I think there's really good therapy available. Obviously, there's medication available, but it's really, making sure that kids have a safe sense of who they are and who the safe people are and who's going to help them in the long run.
And Erin, Dr. Stryker did mention COVID earlier and isolation, and I've been thinking about that a lot. The effects of that were dramatic and extreme for kids, and it was a very long period of time that kids were not learning in the classroom. You work with schools. Can you just say more about how schools are meeting this moment, and also what they're what school teachers and administrators are most worried about right now?
Yeah, I think what you've just described is this reality that in many ways educators are describing, like they've been jerked back to COVID times, or in some ways this experience of half COVID, and then they still have students in their classrooms. So if you see an educator, hug an educator. Many of them are working triple time, not just teaching students online and in person, but also in many times organizing food and mutual aid. So let's reach out to our educators and give them a lot of gratitude for the extraordinary work that they're doing. And I think that they're also very clear. There's a clear sense that this is not going to just end when, everybody come back to school. This is a time where we're really thinking about what do crisis teams look like? How do we increase the capacity for mental health, for recovery and repair? What does grief responsive schools look like as we think about making sure that we're not skipping over the repair and recovery part? I think educators understand that this is not something that we're going to flip a switch and go back to quote unquote normal, but that it's going to take work, it's going to take resources, and it's going to take time to create the kinds of experiences that Dr. Stryker is describing as we help children process, make meaning of, and continue learning and growing, which is what we know we want for all Minnesota kids. So I think educators are very clear that the road is still long ahead, and hoping for all of us to acknowledge that we're going to need to continue to invest time and resources in that work.
The other thing I see educators, I'm so sorry. The other thing I see so I'm on our local school board, and what our teachers have told me is, they're really also spending time almost having to be mental health therapists in the classroom, right? So kids are seeing the person in the desk next to them is not there, and they don't know what's happening, they don't know what's going on, and I think it's become a conversation in the classroom. I think teachers are really doing so wonderful in giving kids space to talk about it, right, and to talk about their fears, and so I would agree, hug whatever educator you see, whatever they need to make it through, they are doing amazing work with our kids.
Yeah, and let's listen to what they're saying they need in order to be able to make this work happen.
And I think we have to point out, too, that schools have been places where arrests have been made, too, right? You know, so it's not just kids being worried about it in school. It's actually, in some cases, you know, happening on school property. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, adults who might not be parents but have kids in their lives, like a teacher or a caretaker. Erin, it's so hard to separate this conversation from political values, too. How do you, what is the utility of maybe avoiding overtly political discussions here? Obviously, that matters if you're a teacher versus whether you're a parent, or is it something that you just simply can't avoid in conversations like this?
Yeah, I mean, first, I just want to acknowledge I love surfacing other adults in children's lives. I think especially if you're a parent listening or a caregiver, sometimes this can feel like a really isolating time. We're working overtime, and also, like you said, we still have to get the pants on the child and get dinner on the table. And so it's a good time to be reminded that sort of resilience is distributed in relationships. This is why Search Institute talks about the sort of roots of resilience. There's not just a tap root, there's many roots, and that's all the adults. It's neighbors, it's aunties, it's educators, it's spiritual advisors, it's neighbors. So that can help us remember that we're not the only adults helping them make sense of this. And I think what we want to affirm for children is the inherent dignity and worth of every person. That we want to make that clear in our conversations with children, that children's sort of humanity and dignity and value are not up for debate. And I think it's okay to make that clear, that we can separate rules and laws and debates from humans and what they mean to us, and then we can engage in conversations. Obviously, in a classroom that would look very different, but even as we're thinking about the kinds of conversations we might have in our homes, we can start thinking about how do we build. Teenagers want to think about this. How do we build a society where we can respect the inherent dignity and worth of every person, and what does that look like? But I think that silence can be kind of overwhelming for some young people, not quite knowing, am I okay? Am I safe here? What are our values and what are our beliefs? We can disagree about a lot of things, but we want to be pretty clear that not only my child belongs, but I believe all children belong in our schools. And then there's going to be a lot of debate about what that looks like, but let's not skip over the human piece. That we all, this is a time to make sure that we're crystal clear on that point.
Yeah. We have Jared in Brooklyn Park on the line. Jared, what do you want to share with us?
And you guys are talking about little kids mostly, but I have older kids who are struggling as well with all what's happening in the city and the shooting that happened. And they want to go out and protest, but then I'm scared because I'm an immigrant. Of course, these are U.S.-born children, but I'm scared that they go out there and then they're going to be mischaracterized, and then they'll be maybe caught up in the scene and maybe be like Freddie, what happened to him. So how do you deal with that? Fighting those kids not to go out to protest, but that's their legal right to go out and protest. But I'm trying to stop them from doing that.
Jared, thank you so much for your call. Great question. We want to protect our children. I can see Erin and Dr. Stryker nodding vigorously. Erin, I'll start with you, and then I'd love to hear Dr. Stryker as well.
Yeah, I just, with older adolescents, first of all, before we even get to the tips, this is just to acknowledge the really painful position that you're in, where you understand your kids do have the right to go out and they have the right to organize and to make their voices heard. And that comes with risk. And those risks are real, and those are likely painful to you as their parent. So this is not just an intellectual question. It's really probably unsettling and scary for you. And acknowledging that is important because each parent is going to be having a different set of conversations with their kids who want to go out and protest. For older adolescents, and then I'll pass it off to Dr. Stryker, I think we want to sort of not minimize and also not catastrophize and be really clear about the real risks. So we can't necessarily, if you have a 17, 18, 19, if you have an emerging adult, we're not going going to be able to always control everything that they do. But we do want to have really realistic conversations about that they're very aware. And not just lecturing them, but what do they understand of the risk? What do they understand? What would their safety plan be? What are they hoping to do at the protest? Are they hoping to be in the back? If things started to feel a little bit unsafe, what would their plan be? So some of it is explaining to them our concerns and our fears, and also then asking them some questions. What's their understanding? What's their risk assessment? What's their plan? And trying to come up with is something that feels safe enough where we can agree, hopefully keeping the lines of communication open as much as possible so that students feel like they can have voice, but do it in a way that's not going to put them directly in harm's way as this person is worried about, as this parent is worried about.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Erin. I think, I have a college-age child who is in the heart of this, and, my conversation with her is, what do you know about what's happening? How are you going to keep yourself safe when you're out there? Obviously, I am so proud of you for wanting to take action. And at the same time, I'm terrified that something bad is going to happen, right? And I think to really just say those things clearly and acknowledge and make sure there's a plan. Like, how do you, memorize my cell phone number so you can call me if something bad happens and you lose your phone, right? How are you going to get yourself out of this or be able to get help if you need it? And then for high school kids who, are really on that verge of like wanting to do something and not quite having all the skills and the access to things. It's really kind of, again, talking through the risks and the benefits. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that kids want to do something, right? That they feel a sense of ownership and, we're going to be 18, we want to vote, like we want to change the world. And how do we nurture that feeling, but also kind of set some realistic guardrails and parameters around safety and what we as parents go through. I really encourage you to have as open of a conversation as you feel like you can about your fears and what you are worried may happen, and not let that take over everything, because we also want to acknowledge and help our kids develop that sense of being a citizen and that sense of ownership of what is happening in the world and the change they want to make.
We could probably take a couple more calls here if you're just joining our conversation. We want to know how the kids in your life are doing right now as it relates to how they've been absorbing news about the ICE enforcement in Minnesota. What questions do you have about supporting their mental health? You can call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Dr. Stryker, going back to what you were saying about parents being honest about their fears and concerns here, I feel like there's so much noise around this in general as a parent, right? You don't want to be too anxious in front of your children because then they absorb it. You don't want to catastrophize because then they start doing it. But yet there seems to be like a needle to thread here that's really important. What more can you say about parents who might be struggling with containing their own emotions or navigating their own emotions and how that would, reflect upon their children?
I think that's exactly right. It's a very fine line, right? We want to be open and honest and not project our own feelings, whether they're overly positive or overly negative, onto our kids. I think the most important thing is we go in kind of as neutral as possible, and not let it become ourselves being overly emotional one way or the other, but using our words to kind of talk through things. I think words have a lot of meaning, but when we are kind of displaying that emotion so strongly, it can kind of double how it impacts our children, right? And that's not to say you can't have feelings, right? Like, these are hard things to talk about. I may tear up or like choke up if I'm talking about this with my younger child, right? Because these are things I don't ever want any of my kids to experience. So I think that's one thing, but to kind of again, model how are we going to take a step back, recalibrate ourselves, get ourselves back into a better place, and then continue a conversation. Because that's the most important thing, is we are going to use skills to manage together, right? And we're going to talk about hard things. We should talk about hard things. We don't want to be so desensitized or shut down that we can't talk about hard things. And I'm not going to force all of my anxieties on you, right? Because as parents, we have all sorts of anxieties about what's going to happen with our kids, whether it's in these situations or just like, oh my God, it's a snowy day and I don't want you to crash, right? Like we have these feelings, and we're going to let our kid drive when they have to, and we're going to let our kids do these things, but we're going to really talk about the fears and the risks as well.
Yeah. Erin, what about you? What advice do you have here?
Yeah, a couple things come up, and one is I just really appreciate, and even just as a parent myself of a tween and a teen, that reminder to settle ourselves and to just reflect on what works for you. I think I've talked to some parents who are like, I'm so overwhelmed, I need to start a new mindfulness class. It's like, I don't think now's the best time for that. I think that adding like a new layer of like a self-care class is not the time. This is a time to really think about what works for us, and what works for me might be very different from what works for Dr. Stryker. So for some of us, it's going to be like, I need to go out and move my body quickly. I need to exercise. It might be that I need to actively notice what's going on in the room. I might need to give myself a hand massage or hum or sing. So really just reflecting on what has worked for me, with the goal of not being totally calm and regulated all the time. I really like Dr. Lisa Damour's definition of good mental health, which is having feelings that make sense in proportion to what's happening in our lives, and then managing those feelings in ways that don't hurt myself or other people. And so it makes sense that we're overwhelmed, right? We're not going to like breathe ourselves into feeling totally calm and totally regulated all the time. So if that's our goal, we're going to probably feel like we're failing. The goal is just to make sure that we are not so unsettled that our catastrophizing, our fear, our anxiety is in the driver's seat, but that we have some tools and we can say, you know, I am sad today. I am grieving today. I am overwhelmed today. And like Dr. Stryker said, here's what I'm doing about it. And when our kids have big feelings, that makes sense. It makes sense that you feel this way. What do you want to do next? Right. And so we're helping them find their toolkit as well. It might not match ours.
Yeah, we have just a little bit of time left here, but Dr. Stryker, I think Erin just laid out some good bullet points that parents might want to follow if they find themselves in this situation. In just a minute or so here, I mean, how would you, what are your sort of your go-to talking points here if you want to start a conversation or find yourself having to have one with your kid?
Yeah, so I'm going to do my skills, right, which is going to be like some deep breathing and maybe counting backwards. And then I'm just going to ask, what do you know about what's going on? What's new in your world? What kinds of things are you noticing that feel good, bad, different? You know, if they bring, you know, have knowledge of the shooting or what's going on, or, you know, kids in my class are gone, we want to kind of like let them ask the questions, right? So, like, how does that make you feel that, you know, so-and-so isn't next to you in class? Like, what questions do you have about that? How does it feel, you know, that you see all these adults at school that are outside the building and you're not quite sure what's happening, right? And so we're going to just really try to ask gentle questions and try to elicit feedback.
Yeah. All right, our time is up for tonight. I want to thank our guests. Dr. P.J. Stryker is a pediatric psychiatrist for the inpatient mental health unit at Children's Minnesota. And we have Erin Walsh. She is the co-founder of the Spark and Stitch Institute. This conversation was produced by Aaron Waldeslassie, and we want to thank you for listening. Have a good evening.
NPR's mental health initiative, Call to Mind, is gathering stories for an upcoming report about sleep. Do you have problems sleeping, and how does it affect your mental health? Email us your story at calltomind@americanpublicmedia.org.
You're listening to NPR News 91.1 FM KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. You can stream us at nprnews.org. There's a light snow in the Twin Cities. It's about 29 degrees. Overnight, we're looking at accumulation of up to 5 inches and near steady temperatures around 30 degrees. Thursday, it's going to be cloudy with highs in the upper 30s. And then Thursday night, cloudy again with a chance of snow after midnight. Friday, mostly cloudy, highs around 30 degrees, lows around 18 degrees overnight on Friday. Saturday, partly sunny, highs in the mid-20s. And then Saturday night, mostly cloudy, lows around 12. This is